8 minutes past 9 this morning. We're turning to rugby. Alan Quinlan is with us. Good morning to you, Alan. How are you getting on?
Good, thanks, Jaron. Yourself?
Yeah, that was much better from Ireland. Scotland were decent in that first half at stages. Ireland sucked up whatever pressure they had, and then were far more clinical than we've seen them be recently.
Yeah, it was a very impressive second half. I think I had a feeling after the game that that was good, and there was a lot of positives there. The accuracy was so much better, the attack shape, and bar a couple of mistakes here and there, I think overall they can take a lot of positives from that. Scotland started the game well, and Ireland didn't panic, and they never really looked like scoring a try. The mistake from Rob Herring for Scotland's try, you know, you could forgive that. In a tighter game, you get punished, and you could lose the game for that. But overall, I just thought it was a much improved performance, and they needed that for themselves more than anything, just for their confidence going by. But it's been, you know, an up and down year for them. 3 losses, nine matches, and 6 wins, 3 losses. I think 42 players used, 10 new caps. So there's been a lot of chopping and changing, and still the core of the team is. There's a lot of familiar faces there that had success in 2018, but certainly they can take a lot of confidence from this.
Yeah, the team hasn't changed that much. Were we expecting the team to change a bit more? Is that maybe one of the things that has happened here? Is that over the course of this period, there's been a bit of experimentation, but actually he's kind of gone back to the core of the previous team?
There's not a lot more he could have done, if you like. I've said a few times to you on the show here about Ryan Baird. I would have loved to have seen him involved. He got injured. That didn't happen. Dan Levy is going to come back in the mix. You know, there's a number of injuries. Larmer, Ringrose, and, you know, Tyke Furlong. It's going to be a pretty attritional period now with Europe coming up in the next while, then the Interpros, then Europe after Christmas, and they're back into Six Nations. So hopefully some of those injured players can come back, and it'll be great to see, you know, a few new players. Obviously, it's going to be difficult to just put them straight in there for the Six Nations, but someone like Harry Byrne, you know, does he play more games in the next few weeks? Would he come into the reckoning for Six Nations? Craig Casey's been doing really well for Munster, Gavin Coombs. So, like I say, you know, Ryan Baird in the next few weeks, if he plays in Europe and does really well and goes on to another level, you have to be careful that you don't throw guys in there, because it'd be brilliant to make a couple of changes when Ireland are full of confidence and their game plan is sticking, and they look like they're really cohesive for a couple of games, and you bring a few players in then hopefully to continue that. But I don't think there's a lot more he could have done in regard personnel changes in the last 8 or 9 months. But you know, the issue is the consistency and you know, not making mistakes, particularly around the breakdown, set piece, all that kind of stuff. We spoke last week about a number of issues there that you can't just get rid of them and say everything is perfect now. We've dominated Scotland probably for 20 years. I think they won 3 times in 20 years. So we have the measure of Scotland. We had the measure of Wales in the first game. We're on a level below England, France, New Zealand, maybe Australia, South Africa. We haven't seen South Africa, but they are World Cup champions. But we're on a level below, and the challenge is to try and get more consistency and
that's the question.
Continuity.
Yeah, so that is the question. What do we need to do to get to the level where we can match England, and when we play England at home, at least be confident that we're going to beat them? Like, I'm looking at the coverage of the England team at the moment, and they're getting hammered. Their own fans were booing them at Twickenham. There's only 2,000 fans, so that's you know, it's a fairly brave person to boo when everybody realises you're not like part of a massive crowd of people just adding your voice. It's like the England fans are booing their own team, and I didn't feel like we were in with a chance of winning the game against England, and it hasn't felt like we've been in with a chance of winning the game against England for 2 seasons at this stage.
Unless we unearth a few incredibly physical, huge specimens of men in the forwards, I think you have to play with a real accuracy against England. You have to move them around. You have to kick well, and stretch them a little bit. So we failed to do that in the last number of matches we played against them. You know, the way the team manned up a couple of weeks ago over in England is very admirable. But I just think we were inaccurate and sloppy in some of the stuff that happened. But you could still, and I know this as a player, you can still take positives out of it. Going forward, I think, you know, the whole accuracy around the breakdown and set piece has to be rock solid and consistent. You cannot win games if you're at 60-70% in those areas at times, and we have been the last number of months. You know, there has been a number of changes. There's concerns about certain areas of the team for sure, that you can't just get rid of guys and bring guys in and expect the same level of performance. But in the next 12 months, I think there'll be so much scrutiny on more change and trying to find a youthful team that can take it to the next World Cup. So how do we beat England? Well, you know, we don't. The reason we do well against Wales and Scotland and these kind of teams consistently is because they don't physically batter us. We can match them. It comes down to a game of rugby then, and your accuracy. You're not under the same physical stress throughout the game.
Yeah.
And you know, if we're accurate in what we're doing there, we're in the game. We can win those games. Even going into the Scotland game at the weekend, there was nobody saying, well, Ireland are going to be beaten by Scotland. You know, I thought Ireland would win the game, but I wanted them to win in a positive manner, and I think they did that. So they've taken a fair bit of flack in the last while, and it's been deserved, but we'll give them the credit now for this performance. But we want to see more of that. I think we saw some attack at the weekend that was very, very positive. The one where Duncan Taylor got yellow carded, that facet of play was outstanding. The accuracy, the shape. You could argue that a tiny little bit more depth from Bundy Aki and quicker hands would have got the ball away and it would have finished with a sensational try. But, you know, Keith Earl's try, the hands from Peter O'Mahony, the subtle little changes that, look, they're trying to do, and I'm sure they're conscious and aware of the pressure outside around moving the ball a bit and executing that stuff. So hopefully we can see that going forward. But, you know, the Six Nations is kind of a cup rugby tournament where you have to have a bit of grunt and be physical and aggressive and kind of have a bit of cup rugby there as well. But we need a little bit of subtle skill and style to go with that.
Do you expect, Quinny, a lot of experimentation to continue during the Six Nations, or do you want to settle side? Like, I'm looking at that back row in particular, and that back row that started at the weekend of Stander, O'Mahony and Doris been exceptional. But then you look at Leinster alone and the amount of backup options, whether it's Max Deegan, Josh van der Fleer, you mentioned Dan Levy coming back, Will Connors is coming in. Do you want to see all those players get game time, or is the preference that actually Andy Farrell picks his best three and sticks with that for as many games as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Nathan, and it's one that it's asked a lot over the years. I think there's a pressure on to do really well in the Six Nations, because if you make multiple changes just to look at guys, okay, you want to give exposure at certain times to people, but if you make multiple changes at times to look at guys and you lose the match, well then, you know, the pressure heaps on the coach. You've got to win the Six Nations. It generates the money. So I think he's got to pick his best team. But in the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think, if players are really you know, Peter O'Mahony was brilliant on Saturday. He's had a really good autumn for a guy who wasn't picked at the start of it. Stander's been really good. Quieter game on Saturday, but his consistency. Doris was brilliant at the weekend. If they don't play well for their provinces in Europe, and somebody else like Max Deegan or a Dan Levy or a Josh van der Fleer or, you know, Gavin Coombs even in Munster, if he goes and plays in Europe, well then the questions have to be asked. I think we can't get into a situation now, and this is where Andy has to be careful. And look, he knows these players inside out, that you rely on past performances. I think we've got to pick form players going forward. And then if they don't perform in the international jersey, well, you know, in the media, they'll be crying out for these selections. So there's certain times where you have to give someone the benefit of the doubt if they didn't play well in the last two European games and their team lost, but they've played well over Christmas. So you can't go too long as an international player with poor form, even for your province. So if they play well and they bring that consistency, and Ireland have a good Six Nations, well, then they'll go on a summer tour, and then you can introduce more players. So it's kind of, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't from the coach's point of view. But we definitely need to see guys who are awarded. Players like I mentioned, if Casey plays really well and is involved in some of the big games in the next couple of weeks for Europe, well, then he's gone on to another level. He's done really well for in the Pro 14. He is one for the future. He's cheeky. He's aggressive. He brings his zip energy. There's still a bit of uncertainty. Who's the backup to Conor Murray? Will Conor Murray be at the next World Cup? And I think Casey is a real live wire and an option. So it's about consistency in their performances when they go back now, and that's probably the key around selection going forward. But I hope Ryan Baird, Coombs, these guys. It'd be great to see some of those under-20s last year knocking on the door now, and Harry Byrne as well.
Yeah, let's talk about Harry Byrne in a minute. Just stay with us. I want to give people one last opportunity to enter our competition. It is the run into Christmas. To help you celebrate an unusual festive season and to stay close to the team of us, Vodafone want to fill your Christmas stocking. Each morning this week, we have a selection of great gifts to give away. This morning, you can win an Irish rugby jersey, a signed copy of Rob Kearney's new book, No Hiding, and a set of wireless sports headphones. To get your name in the hat, just tell us who is today's mystery voice. To enter, send your guess to WhatsApp. The number is 087 9 180 180, and we'll reveal the answer and the winner before we leave you at 10 o'clock. So this is your last chance to enter. If you don't win today, don't worry. Tune in again tomorrow for more chances to win. It's all thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. Who's this?
You could see that it was going to blow up, and it couldn't have been a senior players meeting actually, because David Wallace was in it.
What a sting. Poor David Wallace is sitting there having his breakfast, listening to the show this morning, going, hey. I think everybody knows who that is, right?
You could see that it was going to blow up, and it couldn't have been a senior players meeting actually, because David Wallace was in it.
Right, let's move on, Alan, and let's talk about the number 10 situation, right? Spiky enough, Johnny Sexton, who's obviously reading what the media has to say, which is interesting enough. The Irish rugby team seems, of all of the sports teams, they're fairly open about actually reading everything that's written about them, and they deny it, but they clearly do. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, I don't know. But where are we with regards to the pecking order for number 10? Did Burns present himself as a viable option there to the two Byrne brothers? Too many Burns.
Deep Byrne.
Yeah, Look, Billy Burns, I think, is a very talented player. Is he good enough, and can he be consistent enough and dominant enough? We haven't seen enough of him yet. He's a very talented player. He'll grow in confidence from getting capped. Ross Byrne, I think, has been thereabouts and close to, the backup. What would be brilliant for me and everyone, I think, in Irish rugby, if we could see Joey Carbery back out in the field in January, which is a possibility. There's a possibility he's not going to be rushed back from this one, but it'd be brilliant to see him back. I get excited about Harry Byrne as well. I think Ben Healy's done well in Munster. Jack Crowley's another good option there as well, who's done really well for the 20s. So has the gap closed? It hasn't, unfortunately, and that's a concern. But someday, if the gap hasn't closed, we're just going to have to play whoever's next in line, and they're going to be the ones who are going to try and grasp onto the jersey. But hopefully some of the younger players will have a more aggressive challenge to getting that number 10 jersey and the number 9 jersey, because Conor Murray and Johnny Sexton are not going to be around forever. It'd be brilliant if they've continued on for the next couple of years, and if they both go to the next World Cup, I'm fine with that as long as they're playing well. But it'd be brilliant to have guys really chomping at the bit and getting picked on form ahead of them at times, So, again, it's work in progress, and it's going to take a little bit more time.
We're probably not going to see too much of anybody other than Ross Byrne and Johnny Sexton at Leinster for this season, it looks like, barring an injury.
As regards
seeing Harry,
it's there's nothing Andy Farrell can do about that, because Leo Cullen has got to pick his players according to what his matches that he has there as well. So yeah, it's not going to happen straight away, and that's a pity in a sense. But we don't know if Harry Byrne is good enough to step up. You know, maybe he needs a little bit more time, and a couple of those players maybe will need a little bit more time. So, but it's I don't think it's I think overall, you know, what Sexton has brought has been phenomenal. His consistency in performances and his ability and aggression and leadership and in the team has been second to none. But no matter what level and what player you are, you need to be pushed and challenged as well. And like I say, you know, Carbery was the one who was a real kind of live contender to actually take Johnny Sexton's place, but the injuries have tormented him. So hopefully we can see him back as well.
All right. So out of 10, how would you rate the November/early December tournament that we've just been?
Well, it was probably a 5 or 6 before the weekend, but I bring it up to a 7, maybe 7.5, really because I got enthused by what I saw in the second half. It's not about firing the ball everywhere, Ger, and scoring tries the length of the field, but it's just about not being looking so predictable and cumbersome at times. And I think they did that really well on Saturday. Like I said, the challenge is to try and find some consistency around that.